Mia Thompson had always believed in the quiet stability of her life. The mornings were simple and predictable, coffee on the porch, watching the sun rise over Boston's brownstone streets, and the soft murmur of the neighborhood waking up. Peter, her husband of 10 years, would sip his own coffee, scrolling through emails, occasionally glancing at her with a smile. Life was ordinary, but it was comfortable, and that comfort had felt like love. Until one evening, that comfort began to crumble. It started innocently enough. Mia had been planning a small dinner party for a friend's birthday and wanted to confirm the restaurant reservation. Peter was distracted, as usual, with his work emails, so Mia picked up his phone to double-check the details. That was when a notification popped up from someone she didn't expect, Sophie. Her heart froze. Sophie was her neighbor's niece, a young woman who had recently moved to the city to attend graduate school. She had always been polite and cheerful, nothing more than a friendly presence when they passed each other in the hallway or at community events. But this message thread, it suggested something deeper, something that Mia couldn't ignore. She read the messages quickly, feeling a wave of disbelief wash over her. The words were casual, even friendly, but the familiarity, the laughter, the subtle closeness Peter displayed, it was enough to make her stomach turn. How long had this been going on? Why hadn't she noticed? Questions piled up, racing faster than her thoughts could follow. Mia's hands trembled slightly as she put the phone down. Pretending to herself that she hadn't seen anything, Peter arrived home later that night, cheerful as always, unaware of the turmoil simmering inside his wife. "Long day?" he asked, dropping his bag by the door. "Fine," Mia replied softly, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She wanted to scream, to confront him immediately, but a quiet, icy voice inside her whispered to wait. She needed to understand, to process, before making any accusations. The dinner they shared was awkward, filled with polite conversation that felt hollow. Mia caught herself watching Peter's hands, the way he laughed, the way he leaned back in his chair. Every gesture, every small motion now carried a weight she couldn't ignore. When he mentioned the office, she found herself tense, wondering whether his casual words hid the secret she had glimpsed in the phone messages. The next morning, Mia awoke with a restless feeling. She stared at the ceiling, listening to the faint hum of the city outside, wondering how a relationship she had always thought secure could feel so fragile overnight. Peter was already gone, leaving a note on the kitchen counter. "Early meeting. Don't wait up." Mia traced the letters with her finger, feeling the distance in his absence. For years they had shared mornings together, brief but intimate moments. And now even that was gone. As she prepared for work, Mia couldn't shake the memory of the messages. Sophie's name seemed to hover in her thoughts, bringing with it a swirl of emotions, anger, betrayal, sadness, and, strangely, curiosity. Why had Peter felt drawn to her? Was it admiration, loneliness, or simply distraction? Mia's mind spun with questions that had no answers, leaving her unsettled as she locked the door and stepped out into the crisp morning air. She ran into Sophie later that day at the local grocery store. Sophie greeted her with a warm smile, unaware of the storm brewing in Mia's mind. Mia returned the smile mechanically, nodding as if nothing had happened. But inside, the encounter stirred a strange mixture of emotions. There was no malice in Sophie's tone, no flirtation intended, just a young woman chatting easily with someone she considered a friendly adult in her life. Yet the laughter, the ease of the conversation made Mia's chest tighten. She realized then how far Peter's attention had drifted. Not necessarily in action, but in thought at work. Mia tried to focus on her tasks at the publishing office where she managed the editorial schedules. She organized files, answered emails, and prepared for a meeting, but her mind kept returning to Peter and Sophie. Every time she typed a sentence or reviewed a document, she felt a pang in her chest. A quiet reminder of the fracture she had glimpsed in her marriage. The world around her moved normally, but inside, her thoughts were turbulent. That evening, when she returned home, the apartment felt unnervingly quiet. Peter wasn't there yet, and the dim light cast long shadows across the room. She sat on the couch, staring at the muted cityscape through the window, trying to understand what she felt. She wanted clarity, but instead she felt confusion. Anger, yes, a little. Heartbreak, certainly, but also a curious awareness, a realization that she had been neglected in subtle ways for some time, and that Peter's connection to Sophie, however innocent or misguided, had brought that truth into sharp focus. When Peter finally returned, he was cheerful, kissing her lightly on the cheek, completely unaware of the storm that Mia was barely holding in check. "Busy day?" he asked. "Yes," she said softly, forcing normalcy. Her heart raced, and she realized that the day's encounters had changed something fundamental. It was no longer just about Peter and Sophie. It was about her, her feelings, her trust, her place in her own life. Later that night, Mia sat on the porch with her journal, writing down her thoughts in long, flowing sentences. "I don't know what he feels or what she means to him, but I know that I cannot ignore my own feelings anymore. I need to understand what I deserve and what love should really feel like." The pen paused mid-sentence as she stared at the dark street, the faint glow of the lamplights reflecting off the wet pavement from a passing drizzle. She realized something else. Too, that love was not only about trust, but about attention, presence, and care. For years, she had assumed that love was constant, that it was enough to exist silently alongside each other. But the messages from Peter, the laughter of Sophie, and the cold distance that had quietly grown between her and her husband had shown her another truth. Love needed nurturing, acknowledgement, and visibility. Mia felt a swelling determination. She would not let her marriage disintegrate silently. She would confront Peter, not with rage or accusations, but with honesty. She would demand clarity, understanding, and most importantly, mutual care. And if that wasn't possible, she would find her own path to self-respect and emotional fulfillment. Before bed, she glanced once more at Peter, who had already fallen asleep with the television softly playing in the background. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the muted sounds of the city. The gentle hum of the streetlights, the occasional car passing by, the distant chatter from neighbors were all part of the world she had once taken for granted. But now they felt like reminders that life was fragile, and trust could be shaken in a moment. Mia knew one thing clearly. The path ahead would not be easy. There would be questions, conversations, perhaps arguments. She might discover things she didn't want to know. But she also knew that clarity and truth were worth more than quiet ignorance. Her heart felt heavy, yet strangely alive. She understood that heartbreak could awaken her, not just wound her. And as the night deepened, she whispered to herself, a quiet promise echoing in the stillness. "I will face this. I will understand. I will be seen, and I will not settle for less than the love I deserve." Outside, the city slept unaware, but inside Mia, a storm had begun, not of anger, but of clarity, self-awareness, and determination. The first step had been taken, and there was no turning back. The phone buzzed softly beside her. Another message from Peter. The words were casual. "Can we talk tomorrow? I feel like things are slipping between us." Mia held the phone in her hand, feeling a strange mixture of dread and hope. The conversation that awaited them would decide the future, not just of their marriage, but of her own sense of self. She closed her eyes, letting the silence fill her mind, and for the first time in weeks, she felt ready to face the truth, however painful it might be. The morning after discovering Peter's messages, Mia woke with a strange heaviness pressing against her chest. The sun spilled through the blinds, casting soft stripes of light across the bedroom floor, but she felt none of its warmth. Peter was already gone, leaving another note on the kitchen counter. "Busy with meetings today. Don't wait up." His words were polite, casual, but they cut sharper than any argument. It wasn't just the messages with Sophie, it was the realization that Peter's attention could drift so easily, that his focus could shift to someone else while she felt invisible in her own marriage. Mia dressed slowly, her mind replaying the previous night over and over. She wondered how long Peter had felt this way, whether Sophie had ever realized the unintentional pull she had over him. and how much of their own love had faded without either noticing. By the time she stepped out into the city streets, she felt a mixture of determination and fear. She needed clarity, but she also feared what the truth might bring. As she walked to the train station, she tried to imagine the world as normal. The streets buzzed with the rhythm of morning commuters. Taxis honked at impatient drivers and shopkeepers called out their greetings. Mia moved among them, but every smile from a stranger, every passing glance seemed to mirror her own unease. At the office, she kept herself busy organizing schedules, reviewing manuscripts, and fielding calls. But her thoughts continually strayed back to Peter. Later that afternoon, she ran into Sophie again at a local cafe. Sophie waved enthusiastically and came over to chat. "Hey, Mia. Fancy seeing you here," she said, her bright smile illuminating her face. Mia returned the greeting with a polite nod, her voice clipped but calm. "Hi, Sophie." They made small talk, but Mia felt the sting of every laugh Sophie uttered. The ease of her posture, the gentle sparkle in her eyes. It was clear that Sophie had no intention of causing harm. She didn't know about the messages about Mia's heart quietly unraveling. Yet the presence of this young woman, so vibrant and unaware, reminded Mia of what she had lost in subtle ways: attention, focus, and emotional closeness with Peter. When Mia returned home that evening, the apartment felt heavier than usual. The soft hum of the city outside seemed amplified in the quiet, and she felt a pang of loneliness sharper than any she had experienced in years. Peter arrived later, smiling and tired, dropping his keys on the counter. "Dinner's in 20 minutes, he said, casual as ever. Mia nodded, feeling a strange mix of resentment and longing. She wanted to confront him, but she also wanted to understand him. She wanted to hear his voice admit mistakes, acknowledge neglect, and offer a path back to each other. She realized then that anger alone wouldn't restore trust. Honesty might. After dinner, she asked Peter to sit down with her. The soft light of the dining room lamp illuminated the kitchen in a warm glow. "Peter, we need to talk," she said, her voice steady. He looked up, surprise flickering across his face. "I saw your messages with Sophie," she continued, swallowing the lump in her throat. "I know something is happening between you two, and I need to understand." Peter's face paled, and he looked down at his hands, avoiding her eyes. "Mia, it's not what you think," he said quietly. "I didn't mean to hurt you. I've been distracted, lonely maybe, but nothing happened physically. It was just attention I didn't realize I was giving. I didn't mean to cross a line." Mia's chest tightened. "Attention." "You laughed with her, shared stories, talked in ways you never talk to me anymore. And it hurts, Peter. It really does." He reached for her hand, hesitating. "I know, and I'm sorry. I've been blind. I've taken you for granted, and I didn't see how much you were hurting." Tears threatened to fall, but Mia held them back. She realized something important in that moment. Heartbreak didn't always come from betrayal and action. Sometimes it came from neglect, from a quiet absence of presence and care. Peter's words were a start, but they weren't enough. She needed him to show her that he saw her again, not just said it. The days that followed were tense, but reflective. Mia noticed subtle changes in herself. She spent time journaling, walking in the park, and reflecting on her needs. She realized that she had neglected herself as much as Peter had neglected her. She deserved attention, care, and emotional intimacy. She deserved to be heard, truly seen, and appreciated. This self-awareness became her armor, preparing her for the difficult conversations yet to come. One afternoon, while preparing files at the office, Mia received a message from Sophie. It was innocent, casual. "Hey, Mia, I hope you're having a good day. Want to grab coffee sometime?" Mia's first instinct was irritation, but then she paused. Sophie had done nothing wrong. The young woman was kind, friendly, and completely unaware of the strain she had inadvertently placed on Mia's life. Mia realized that the situation wasn't about blame, it was about truth, honesty, and attention within her marriage. That evening, Mia decided to confront her feelings fully. She called Peter to meet her on the porch after dinner. The rain had started, soft at first, and then steady, creating a gentle rhythm on the roof above. The scent of wet earth and fresh rain filled the air. Adding to the surreal intensity of the moment, Peter came out, umbrella in hand, and looked at her with uncertainty. "Mia, what's going on? I need to know where we stand." "Peter," she said, her voice calm but resolute. "I need honesty, clarity, and attention. I need to feel like we're in this together, like I matter to you again." Peter lowered the umbrella, letting the rain soak him slightly. "I've been blind, Mia. I've allowed distance to grow between us. I didn't realize how much I was hurting you or neglecting you." "Sophie? She's just a friend, but I see now how my focus on her highlighted what we've lost between us. I want to fix that. I want to fix us." Mia's eyes welled with tears. Relief and sadness intertwined, forming a knot of emotion she hadn't felt in years. She realized that Peter's neglect wasn't malicious, but it had caused pain nonetheless. What mattered now wasn't the past hit, was whether he would act to rebuild their bond over the next week. Mia noticed subtle shifts. Peter stayed home from work a bit earlier, asked her about her day, and genuinely listened when she spoke. The small gestures, the way he held her hand while cooking. The quiet attention in conversation began to rebuild the trust that had been shaken. It wasn't instant. Healing rarely is. But every smile, every laugh, shared again, added threads of connection back into the frayed fabric of their relationship. One evening, after a long walk in the rain, they returned home dripping wet but smiling. Mia realized that heartbreak had taught her resilience, self-respect, and clarity. She understood that love required presence, attention, and care, not just words, but consistent action. She had confronted her fears, acknowledged her pain, and discovered strength she didn't know she possessed. Peter, sitting beside her on the couch, held her hand and said softly, "I'm sorry for everything. I promise to see you again every day in all the ways I should have." Mia looked into his eyes and saw sincerity. She realized that healing wasn't about perfection, it was about willingness, effort, and honesty. And while the memory of Sophie's laughter or presence might linger in the corners of her mind, it no longer carried the sting of fear or betrayal. Instead, it served as a reminder that neglect, not malice, had caused the fracture, and that conscious attention and care could repair even the deepest wounds. That night, as Mia lay in bed beside Peter, she felt a quiet sense of renewal. The apartment was warm and safe, and the soft glow of the streetlights outside created a comforting atmosphere. She whispered to herself, a promise echoing in the silence. "I will not settle for neglect. I will demand love, attention, and honesty. And I will cherish the person who chooses to give them to me." Outside, the city continued its rhythm, indifferent to human hearts, yet within that quiet home, a fragile and precious reconciliation had begun. Mia understood that love could be rediscovered, not just in grand gestures, but in small, everyday actions. The road ahead would require effort, patience, and openness, but for the first time in weeks, she felt ready to walk it with courage and clarity. The weeks following Mia's confrontation with Peter were filled with quiet reflection, small gestures, and a slow rebuilding of trust. The tension that had gripped their home softened, replaced by a tentative warmth. Mia had realized that heartbreak did not have to define her life. It could be a lesson, a catalyst for clarity and strength. She still remembered the unsettling messages and Sophie's easy laughter, but the sting had dulled. What mattered now was what she and Peter could create together. Peter had been consistent in his efforts. He stayed home from work earlier, set aside distractions during dinner, and asked meaningful questions about her day. But most importantly, he listened, not in polite, half-attentive ways, but fully, with focus and care. Mia noticed the change most in small moments. A hand lightly brushing hers when they passed in the kitchen. A smile lingering after a shared joke. A quiet acknowledgement when she spoke about her own desires and frustrations. These simple gestures carried more weight than any grand apology. One rainy afternoon, Mia took a walk alone through the park. The rain fell gently, soaking the paths but leaving the surrounding trees fresh and vibrant. She thought of Sophie, of the distance Peter had created through neglect, and of the quiet storm that had passed through their lives. Mia realized something important. She had been given a second chance. Not because Peter had been perfect, but because she had demanded attention, honesty, and presence. She understood now that love was not a passive state T, required active care from both people. Returning home, Mia found Peter preparing tea. He looked up from the counter and smiled softly. "You're back early," he said, handing her a steaming cup. She accepted it, the warmth radiating through her hands and into her chest. The gesture was simple, but it spoke volumes. She realized that this was how change was meant to happen. Quietly, consistently, without drama, yet deeply affecting the heart. "Peter," she began, her voice calm but firm, "I need to tell you something." He set down the kettle and gave her his full attention, a small but important sign of respect. "I've spent these past weeks thinking about us, about what I deserve and what love really looks like. And I've realized that I want to move forward, but only if we continue to be honest and attentive to each other. I can't allow neglect or distraction to ever divide us again." Peter nodded, understanding the gravity of her words. "Mia, I promise you, I've seen my mistakes and I've learned from them. I'll never take your presence for granted again. You've always been the center of my world, and I'm going to show it every day, not just in words, but in actions." Their conversations became a new kind of intimacy. For the first time in months, they spoke openly about their fears, desires, and dreams. Peter admitted how easy it had been to drift toward Sophie's companionship, not because he loved her, but because he had neglected the very connection that existed with Mia. It was a difficult admission. But Mia felt relief in his honesty. She didn't need perfection. She needed truth. Over the next few days, Mia began noticing subtle yet profound changes in herself as well. She was no longer consumed by worry or jealousy. Instead, she felt a growing confidence in her own worth, an understanding that her emotional needs were valid and deserved attention. She spent more time engaging in her hobbies, painting and journaling, and even began organizing small social gatherings at home, creating space for laughter and connection in their lives. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Mia and Peter took a long walk along the city's riverside. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of wet pavement and distant greenery. They walked in silence at first, their hands occasionally brushing. Then Peter took her hand gently. "I remember when we first met," he said, smiling faintly. "I used to hold your hand like this everywhere we went." Mia squeezed his hand, a small smile playing on her lips. "And now?" she asked, teasing lightly. "Now I hold it with intention," he replied. "I see you, Mia, every day, in every way I should have before." The honesty in his tone, combined with the sincerity in his eyes, stirred something deep within her. She realized that the fractured trust could be repaired not by ignoring the past, but by consciously choosing attention, care, and love in the present. That night, as they returned home, Mia felt a rare calm. The apartment, once heavy with tension and unspoken pain, now carried a quiet warmth. Peter poured them both a glass of wine, and they sat together on the couch, talking about everything and nothing, memories of their early dates, hopes for future vacations, and even dreams that had been set aside during years of routine. The connection was tender, real, and present. A week later, Mia received a message from Sophie. She opened it cautiously, expecting a reminder of past unease. But it was innocent, simple. "Hi, Mia. I hope you're doing well. Would you like to meet for coffee sometime?" Mia smiled softly, realizing she no longer felt the pang of jealousy or fear. Sophie's presence was harmless. It was the past, not the present. Mia decided to respond kindly, understanding that their lives could coexist without emotional interference, as long as boundaries and honesty remained intact. As autumn approached, Peter continued to make subtle but meaningful gestures. He left notes of appreciation on her pillow, remembered small details about her day, and even joined her for morning walks. The slow, consistent attention rebuilt the bond that had been strained. Mia realized that healing didn't require perfection, it required consistent effort, honesty, and the willingness to see each other truly. One quiet evening, Mia sat on the porch with Peter, wrapped in a blanket against the chill. The rain had started softly, a gentle rhythm against the roof. She looked at him and said, "Thank you, Peter, not just for apologizing or promising, but for actually showing me that you care, that you see me." Peter smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I see you, Mia, every day. I won't let you feel invisible again. You've reminded me what love really is, not just a word, but an action." The rain fell around them, steady and calming. Mia realized that the storm of emotions, the heartbreak, and the fear of neglect had all served a purpose. They had reminded her of her own worth and forced Peter to recognize the importance of presence, attention, and honesty. Love, she understood now, wasn't passive. It needed to be nurtured, respected, and lived intentionally over time. The echoes of Sophie's laughter faded into the background of their lives, replaced by the quiet, consistent intimacy that Mia and Peter had worked to restore. They laughed together, cried together, and shared moments both ordinary and profound. The bond they rebuilt was stronger, not because the past had been erased, but because it had been acknowledged, understood, and healed with intention. One night, as they watched the city lights from the porch, Mia rested her head on Peter's shoulder. "I feel like we've found our way back," she whispered. "We have," Peter replied softly, "and we'll keep finding each other every day." Mia realized that love wasn't about avoiding mistakes or challenges. It was about facing them, understanding them, and choosing to stay fully and intentionally. She had learned that heartbreak could awaken resilience and clarity, that neglect could be corrected with attention, and that trust could be restored through honesty and care. And though she would always remember the uncertainty, the messages, and the quiet fear of losing Peter, it no longer held power over her heart. Instead, it became a lesson, a reminder of her strength, her worth, and the care that true love required. That night, as the rain fell steadily, Mia closed her eyes, feeling peace and renewal. She whispered a quiet promise to herself. "I will always honor my heart. I will demand love that sees me. I will nurture the connection that matters, and I will never settle for less." Outside, the city slept, indifferent to human struggles, but within the small apartment, love had been rediscovered. It was not perfect, and the journey was ongoing. But Mia knew one undeniable truth. She and Peter had chosen each other again, with honesty, care, and the awareness that true love required presence and attention. The storm had passed, and in its place was a quiet, tender, an enduring connection, a love renewed not by chance but by choice. The night began like any other, calm and quiet. Yet Emma could sense something different in the air. The Seattle rain tapped gently on her living room window as she sat by the fireplace, lost in thought. Her husband Mark had been acting strange all day, not distant, but secretive, like a man carrying something in his mind. Earlier that afternoon, he had simply said, "Dress nicely tonight. I've planned something special." Those words echoed in her head as she looked out into the wet, glimmering street, wondering what he meant. It had been years since Mark surprised her with anything. Their marriage had once been full of laughter and small gestures, but lately life had become a quiet routine: work, dinner, silence, and sleep. They weren't unhappy, not really, but the spark that once tied them together had faded under the weight of time. Emma missed the man who used to hold her hand for no reason, who used to whisper something silly just to make her smile. So when he said he had planned something, her heart had fluttered with cautious hope. Maybe he wanted to fix what had been slowly slipping between them. Maybe tonight was the night they would remember who they used to be. She stood in front of her mirror, smoothing down the navy blue dress she hadn't worn in years. It fit a little tighter now, but she smiled at her reflection anyway. She added a simple necklace, the one Mark gave her on their first anniversary, and let her hair fall naturally around her shoulders. She looked softer, younger somehow. When Mark entered the room, he stopped mid-step. His eyes softened. "You look beautiful," he said quietly, like a truth he hadn't spoken in a long time. She smiled, though a small ache stirred in her chest. "You don't look too bad yourself." The dinner was simple: roasted vegetables, salmon, and a bottle of wine they had been saving for no particular reason. The candles flickered between them, their light gentle against the rain-streaked windows. It almost felt like the world outside had paused, leaving only the two of them and the faint hum of old music playing in the background. For the first time in months, they talked, really talked. About work, about how the neighborhood had changed, about the trips they never took. Mark laughed more than she expected, and Emma found herself smiling easily, feeling lighter. But there was something else, something unspoken. Mark kept glancing at the clock, his eyes flicking toward the door every so often. She noticed it, though she tried not to. Maybe he's nervous, she thought. Maybe it's part of the surprise. Halfway through dessert, the doorbell rang. Emma blinked in confusion. "Are we expecting someone?" Mark hesitated for a moment, then said, "Yes. That must be Ethan. Ethan." She repeated, "Your friend from college." He nodded. "He's in town for a few days. I thought it would be nice if he joined us." It wasn't what she expected, but she smiled politely. Ethan had visited them years ago, back when their marriage was still young. He had been easy to talk to, quiet but charming, the kind of man who made people feel comfortable. When Mark opened the door, Ethan stepped in, brushing the rain from his jacket. He looked older. Of course, the streaks of gray in his hair and the lines on his face told their own story, but his smile was the same. "You haven't changed much, Emma," he said warmly. She laughed softly. "I wish that were true." Mark brought out another glass, poured him wine. And soon the three of them were sitting around the table, talking like old friends. The air was light, the laughter easy. They talked about college days, road trips, mistakes, and dreams that never came true. For a while, Emma forgot about the tension that had filled her house for years. But underneath the laughter, something else began to grow quiet, subtle, impossible to name. Ethan's eyes lingered on her when she spoke, not inappropriately, but with an intensity that made her heart skip. And sometimes, when Mark looked at her, she noticed something in his gaze too, a softness mixed with regret. It felt like all three of them were carrying unspoken things inside. When the dishes were cleared, the three of them moved to the living room. Mark put on an old record, one they used to dance to when they were newly married. The familiar notes filled the silence like a ghost from the past. "This song," Emma whispered, "I haven't heard it in years." Mark looked at her. "I remember you used to hum it while cooking." She smiled faintly. "I didn't think you noticed." Ethan leaned forward, his voice calm but thoughtful. "It's strange, isn't it? How we forget the things that once made us feel alive." Mark nodded slowly, his eyes distant. "Sometimes we just get lost in life." The three of them sat there for a moment, listening to the song fade into silence. The air felt heavier now, filled with meaning that no one dared to name. Emma could feel it the way time had wrapped itself around them, the years of things left unsaid pressing quietly between heartbeats. Mark stood suddenly and poured more wine. "Two old friends," he said, raising his glass, "and two new beginnings." Emma hesitated before raising hers. The words felt both hopeful and uncertain. "To new beginnings," she echoed softly. As they clinked glasses, the rain outside grew louder. It filled the pauses between their words. A soft rhythm that seemed to match the strange energy in the room. Ethan's voice broke the silence again. "Mark, I've got to say, you've built a good life here." Mark smiled faintly. "I've tried." Then, after a pause, he added, "But sometimes even a good life can feel incomplete." Emma's eyes lifted to him, searching his face for meaning. There was something different about him tonight. Not cold or distant, but almost raw, open in a way he hadn't been in years. She tried to smile. "Maybe it's just been a long week." But deep down, she knew this night was about more than dinner. Mark had planned something. Yes, but she wasn't sure if it was for her, for them, or for himself. When Ethan leaned back on the couch, his eyes thoughtful, he said something that stayed in her mind. "Sometimes what we're looking for isn't gone. It's just waiting to be noticed again, for a fleeting second." Emma felt that he wasn't talking about life or dreams, he was talking about her. The clock ticked softly. The candles burned low. The rain outside softened into a mist, and the city beyond the windows glowed faintly under the streetlights. Emma looked at the two men sitting across from her, her husband, and his oldest friend. Two people from her past, both looking at her with quiet understanding. As if they saw the same truth she was only beginning to realize. Something had shifted. She couldn't explain it, but she could feel it in her heartbeat. In the weight of the silence, in the way Mark kept glancing her way. Not with suspicion or distance, but with something gentler. It wasn't love reborn, not yet, but it was something close, something fragile that had been buried. Under years of unspoken things, when the night drew closer to midnight, Mark stood up and said softly, "Stay a while, Ethan. It's late, and the rain isn't letting up." Ethan hesitated, then nodded. "All right, if you're sure." Mark looked at Emma as if asking her something with his eyes. She nodded. Of course. As Mark went to get the guest blanket, Emma found herself alone with Ethan for a moment. Neither of them spoke. They didn't have to. The air was charged with something neither of them fully understood, a mix of nostalgia, quiet warmth, and something far more dangerous, the feeling of being seen. Truly seen after a very long time. And as the last candle flickered, casting soft gold light across the room, Emma knew one thing for certain. This night was going to change something. She didn't know how or why, but the stillness around her wasn't empty anymore. It was full of meaning waiting to unfold. Outside, the rain whispered against the glass like a secret, and inside, 3 hearts sat quietly, each carrying its own storm. The night deepened as the rain refused to end. The house was quiet except for the faint sound of droplets tapping the windows and the low hum of a jazz song still playing in the background. Emma gathered the plates from dinner, her thoughts tangled. Something about the evening felt unusual too, still too heavy with unspoken emotion. She tried to shake it off, convincing herself that it was only the wine making her heart beat faster than usual. When she returned to the living room, she found Mark and Ethan laughing over an old college story. Mark's face looked younger somehow, his eyes alive in a way she hadn't seen in years. Ethan's laughter filled the room, warm and deep, and for a moment, Emma felt as if she were watching 2 old souls find a piece of their past again. She smiled quietly, not wanting to disturb them. Mark noticed her standing near the doorway. "Come sit with us, Emma," he said softly. "You're part of this too." She hesitated, then sat across from them. Ethan leaned forward. "You know, Mark and I used to stay up all night talking about life," he said, smiling at her. "We thought we had everything figured out back then." Mark chuckled. "We were wrong about almost everything. Except one thing," Ethan added, his eyes briefly meeting Emma's. "That time changes everyone. Sometimes for better, sometimes not." There was a pause. Emma felt something stir inside her, something she hadn't felt in years, a mix of vulnerability and quiet curiosity. The way Ethan spoke carried weight, as though every word came from experience. Mark refilled everyone's glasses. "You're still the same philosopher," he teased. Ethan grinned, but his expression softened. "Maybe, or maybe I just learned the hard way that we shouldn't take people for granted." Those words hung in the air. Emma looked at Mark, wondering if he heard what she did, the subtle reminder of how easily love could fade when left unattended. Mark looked away, pretending to focus on the music. The song changed, and Emma recognized it instantly. Another old tune from their early years. It had been their favorite, one they danced to under fairy lights on their wedding night. Mark's eyes met hers across the table. "Dance with me," he said suddenly. She blinked. "Now, why not?" he said, standing up and offering his hand. Ethan smiled quietly, almost wistfully, as Mark led her to the center of the room. The song was slow, gentle, the kind that pulled memories from forgotten corners of the heart. Emma placed her hand in Mark's, and for a brief moment, she was transported back to a younger version of herself, full of dreams, laughter, and warmth. Mark's grip was familiar, yet uncertain. as if he was trying to remember how to hold her. "It's been a while," he murmured. "It has," she whispered back. They moved slowly, almost awkwardly at first, then more naturally as the rhythm took over. Ethan watched them quietly, a small smile touching his lips, though his eyes carried a shadow of something deeper, perhaps longing, perhaps understanding. When the song ended, Mark stepped back and looked at his friend. "Your turn," he said jokingly. Ethan shook his head. "I don't think so." But Emma smiled. "Oh, come on, Ethan. It's just a dance." After a pause, Ethan stood, his expression soft. "All right? Just one." Mark nodded, watching as his old friend and his wife shared a brief dance. There was nothing inappropriate in it, only a strange tenderness. A recognition between two people who had once shared laughter and time and were now older, gentler, more aware of how fragile human connection could be. The air grew quiet after the music stopped. Mark poured the last of the wine. "It's strange," he said slowly, "how life keeps moving even when you don't notice." Ethan nodded. "Until one day you wake up and realize you've forgotten what used to make you happy." Emma looked down at her hands. "Maybe happiness isn't something we lose. Maybe it just changes shape." "Hey." That made both men silent for a moment. The rain outside softened into a mist, and a cool breeze slipped through the open window. Mark leaned back on the couch, his voice low. "You know, when I called you today, Ethan, I wasn't sure why. I just felt like maybe I needed to remember who I was before everything got so quiet." Ethan looked at him, thoughtful. "And did you remember?" Mark sighed. "A little. Tonight reminded me of what I used to love about life, about her, about us." He turned to Emma. "I don't say it enough, but you've been patient with me. I see it now." Emma's eyes softened. "We both stopped trying somewhere along the way." He reached for her hand. "Maybe tonight is a start." Ethan smiled faintly, looking at the two of them. "You know," he said softly, "most people never get that chance to start again." His words carried a quiet sadness that didn't go unnoticed. Emma looked at him and saw a loneliness she hadn't before. "You sound like someone who's lost something important," she said gently. Ethan gave a small laugh. "Maybe I have. Or maybe I just miss the kind of peace that only comes when you're loved, right?" That line lingered between them like a secret truth. The fire burned lower and the clock ticked softly. The night was deep, but none of them wanted it to end. Mark left briefly to fetch more logs, and in that quiet moment, Emma and Ethan sat across from each other. "You two have something special," he said quietly. "Don't let time take it from you." Emma smiled faintly. "It doesn't feel that special sometimes." He hesitated. "It still can be. You just have to want it." Mark returned, and they spent the next hour talking about life, regrets, second chances. The conversation grew softer, more honest. There was no pretending anymore. They were three adults who had seen enough of life to know how easily things could slip away. Eventually, the clock struck 1. The storm had eased, leaving the world outside calm and damp. Mark yawned. "I think I'll get some sleep. Ethan, you can take the guest room upstairs." Ethan nodded. "Thanks, I appreciate it." Mark turned to Emma. "You coming?" "I'll clean up first," she said. When Mark went upstairs, the house felt quiet again. Ethan helped her gather the glasses, moving carefully as if afraid to disturb the silence. When their hands brushed accidentally, she froze. He didn't pull away immediately, but his voice was steady. "You deserve to be happy, Emma." Her throat tightened. "So do you." They didn't say more. Some moments didn't need words. When everything was clean, she watched him walk toward the stairs. Before he disappeared, he turned slightly. "Good night," he said softly. "Good night, Ethan." She stood there for a while after he left, staring at the dim light on the staircase. Something had shifted in her. Not desire, not confusion, but awareness. Awareness that her life had become too quiet, and that somehow this night had reminded her what warmth felt like again. When she finally went upstairs, Mark was already half asleep. He stirred as she slipped under the covers beside him. "You okay?" he murmured. "Yes," she whispered. "Just thinking." He smiled faintly. "About what?" "About us," she said. "About how maybe we've both been living half awake." He reached for her hand, his eyes half closed. "Then let's wake up together." 'Twas a simple line, but it stayed with her as she lay there listening to the fading rain. She realized something important. Love didn't always burn brightly. Sometimes it waited quietly, hoping to be noticed again. And maybe tonight had been their reminder. But deep inside, she also knew that tomorrow wouldn't be simple. Ethan's presence had stirred something, not just between her and him, but within herself. Something she couldn't quite name yet. When she closed her eyes, she didn't dream of passion or romance. She dreamed of standing in the rain somewhere between the past and the future, trying to find her way back to herself. And in that dream, she wasn't alone. When Emma woke up the next morning, the house was filled with soft golden light. The rain had stopped, leaving behind the scent of wet earth and quiet air. For a long time, she just lay there watching the curtains move gently with the breeze. Mark was still asleep beside her, his face peaceful in a way she hadn't seen in years. The events of the night before replayed in her mind: the laughter, the dance, the long talks, and Ethan's eyes when he'd said, "You deserve to be happy." Something about that sentence stayed with her. It wasn't romantic. It was real. It was like someone had seen through the surface and understood. The weight she carried silently for years. Emma slipped out of bed quietly, putting on a sweater as she went downstairs. The morning sun streamed through the kitchen window. She began making coffee, the simple rhythm of the morning helping her organize her thoughts. A few minutes later, Ethan appeared, dressed neatly, his bag slung over his shoulder. He smiled politely. "Morning," he said. "Morning," she replied, handing him a cup. "Did you sleep well?" He nodded. "Better than I expected." They sat in silence for a while, sipping coffee and listening to the birds outside. It wasn't uncomfortable, just quiet, thoughtful. Emma could feel 1,000 words sitting unsaid between them. "I should head out soon," Ethan said finally. "So soon?" she asked. He looked at her, his smile faint. "I think it's best. Sometimes the longer you stay, the harder it is to leave." She understood what he meant. There was something fragile about this morning, like one wrong word could break the balance they had found last night. "Thank you," she said softly. "For what?" "For reminding me to feel again," she said. "For reminding us both." He looked down at his cup. "You didn't need me for that, Emma. You just needed to look at what was always there." Before she could answer, Mark came downstairs, still sleepy but smiling. "You're leaving already?" he asked how Ethan stood and nodded. "Yeah, I've got to get back to Chicago." Mark walked over and hugged him. "It was really good seeing you again, old friend. You reminded me of the guy I used to be." Ethan smiled. "He's still there, Mark, just hidden behind the noise." Mark chuckled. "Maybe?" Emma walked him to the door. The morning air was crisp, the street damp and quiet. Ethan turned to her one last time. "Take care of yourself," he said. "You too," she replied. And then he was gone down the street into his car, and out of their lives as quickly as he had come back into it. The days that followed were quieter, but something in the house had changed. Mark began to talk more, laugh more. He suggested small things, cooking together, going for walks, revisiting places they hadn't been to in years. It was as if the night of the storm had woken something inside him, too. One evening, about a week later, Emma found him sitting in the backyard watching the sunset. She brought 2 cups of tea and sat beside him. "Do you ever think about how we got here?" she asked. He smiled slightly. "All the time. I think we both forgot that love isn't something that just happens once. You have to choose it again and again." She looked at him, realizing he meant it. "I think I stopped choosing for a while," she admitted. "So did I," he said. "But maybe we can start again." They sat in silence, watching the sky turn orange and pink. There was no dramatic music, no perfect moment, just peace. That night, as she folded laundry, her phone buzzed. It was a message from Ethan. Just wanted to say thank you. That night reminded me what real connection feels like. Don't lose it." She read it twice, smiled faintly, and then deleted it. Not because it meant nothing, but because it had already done its job. Ethan wasn't meant to stay. He was meant to remind them both of what they had forgotten. A few months passed. Autumn came, filling the town with golden leaves and cool winds. Emma and Mark had found a quiet rhythm again. They talked more, laughed often, and held hands when they walked through the park. It wasn't perfect, but it was real, and that was enough. One afternoon, while cleaning the attic, Emma came across an old photo album. Inside were pictures of their early years, their wedding, their first home, vacations they had taken when they were young and hopeful. She smiled, her fingers tracing over one photo of Mark with his arm around her. Both of them laughing. When Mark came upstairs, she showed it to him. "Look at us," she said. "We look like we thought the world belonged to us." He chuckled softly. Maybe it did, or maybe we just believed enough to make it feel that way. She looked at him, her voice warm. Maybe we can believe again. He kissed her forehead. We already are. But not everything stayed simple. One evening, while they were preparing dinner, Mark received a message. He frowned slightly. "Who's that?" She asked. "It's Ethan," he said. "He's in town again for a few days. He asked if we'd like to grab dinner together." Emma hesitated. "Do you want to?" He shrugged. "I think it would be nice. Closure, maybe, or just friendship." She smiled slowly. "All right." When they met Ethan 2 nights later, it felt different. There was no tension, no hidden meaning. Just 3 people who had shared a strange, unforgettable night that had changed them all in quiet ways. Ethan looked happier, lighter somehow. "I started painting again," he told them. "I had stopped years ago. But that night, something about it reminded me of what I'd lost." Emma smiled. "I'm glad." Mark lifted his glass. 2 second chances in life, in love, and in everything we almost gave up on. They clinked glasses, and for a moment it felt like time stood still. After dinner, Emma and Mark walked home together under the streetlights. The air was cold, and she wrapped her arm through his. "You know," she said quietly, "if you hadn't invited him that night, I don't think we'd be here like this." He smiled. "Funny how life works. Sometimes the people who show up unexpectedly are the ones who fix the cracks you didn't know were there." She nodded, her eyes soft. "And sometimes they leave behind a reminder to keep trying." When they reached their door, she looked at the sky, the same kind of deep gray blue as that stormy night months ago. Only this time it wasn't heavy. It was calm, like a promise kept. Inside, Mark turned on the radio, and the same song from that night played. Emma laughed softly. "You remembered?" I told you," he said. "We're starting again." He reached for her hand, and they began to dance. Not like before, not out of nostalgia or guilt, but out of gratitude. Every step was lighter, every smile more honest, as they moved slowly. She thought about Ethan, not with longing, but with peace. Some people come into your life to stay, others to wake you up. He had done both, in his own quiet way. The song ended, and Mark pulled her close. "I'm glad we didn't give up," he whispered. "Me too," she said, her voice soft but certain. Outside, the wind rustled through the trees, carrying with it the last hint of summer and the quiet promise of something new. Emma realized that love wasn't about excitement or perfection. It was about choosing to stay when everything felt ordinary, about finding warmth even after the storm. And though part of her still remembered the look in Ethan's eyes, she knew now that it wasn't temptation she had seen, it was reflection. He had seen the same emptiness she had, and together, for one night, they had reminded each other that it was possible to feel again. Now, as she rested her head on Mark's shoulder, she felt whole again, not because life was perfect, but because she had finally remembered how to be present in it. The night was still. The storm was gone. And somewhere miles away, Ethan stood on his balcony, painting the sky the same color as that night, the one that had changed everything. He smiled quietly, thinking of the couple who had unknowingly helped him heal too, and for all 3 of them. The story that began with rain ended with peace, not with endings or regrets, but with quiet understanding that sometimes love needs to be broken before it can be real again.